Welcome to the Transforming Lives panel, the podcast where inspiration and transformation converge. Each week, we come together to explore the depths of personal growth and life-changing experiences. Come along with us as we deep dive into personal stories. Through intimate conversations, our guests and panel reveal the pivotal moments that have defined their paths, shown their strengths, and formed their passions. We are so happy you are here, and we welcome you to our circle where empathy and empowerment are always at the forefront.
Before we start, Kate, before you jumped on, we were saying that if we have questions, we're just going to mute ourselves. And then if we have questions, we'll put our hand up so that we're not jumping in on top of each other. And welcome to another episode of Transforming Lives podcast panel. We are so grateful you're here with us. And usually it's just us. Today we have a special guest, Stephanie Shaughnessy, and we will introduce her in a moment. But Stephanie, we always start off with just a little bit of a grounding, just kind of feet on the floor and close your eyes, and everyone just kind of take a deep breath and just kind of let your day go. And for a few minutes, can we lose the to-do list and the didn't get done list and spend some really intentional time together? We have gratitude for having a new guest with us today. And so when we come back, we are welcoming Stephanie Shaughnessy, and she is an Enneagram coach. And so this is super exciting, I think, for all of us. We all did the quiz. But Stephanie, I would first love for you, I read your bio and everybody read your bio, but I would love for you to kind of touch on that first, because this was not a linear path for you. So really interesting how you got to where you are right now.
No, yeah, it certainly hasn't been. Yeah, so I will just, first of all, I just want to say thank you all for having me. I'm very much just so appreciative, and I've always loved Kate. Kate and I connected, I don't know how long it's been. I seem to have no frame of reference post 2020, but could have been 6 months ago, could have been 16 years ago. But Kate, I love you. Thank you for reaching out and asking me to be on this. I am in a nutshell, I'm a Detroit, Michigan native. I was born and raised there. My parents divorced when I was about 9 years old. My biological dad, unfortunately went down a route of addiction. And my parents, he left when I was 10, and I was raised by my mom. For a period of time, my mom was on welfare, and my mom is truly the poster child of pulling herself up and using resources and programs that helped her get an education and literally get us out of the situation we were living in. So she was approved for a city of Detroit funded nursing program, and went through that, became a licensed practical nurse, and moved my brother and I into the suburbs pre-teen era. And then a couple of years later, met my stepdad. And so I graduated high school in Michigan, and I learned my work ethic 100% comes from my mother. And she went into nursing, not necessarily because she had a passion for it, which I learned years later, but she said to me that I knew there would always be a need for me to go into, that field. I would always have a job, no matter what city or state I ever lived in. And that definitely made an impression on me as a kid. And my mom had a younger sister, and an older brother who were Detroit police officers. I was very close to my aunt, and especially during the tumultuous time my parents were going through a divorce. And I always felt very safe around my aunt. And I didn't have a whole lot of safety. I didn't feel like that safety growing up, particularly as a little kid. But around my aunt, I felt like, Aunt Barbara's a badass and she's got me, and, we're good. And my aunt's an Enneagram 8, by the way. But, she had this huge influence over me of going into law enforcement. So my dream growing up, I just always saw that for myself. And I followed my parents to Florida. My mom got sick of the snow. I came down here when I was 20, went to police academy at 21, I was actually hired and sworn in by Port Orange Police just south of Daytona Beach 3 months to the day after September 11th happened. And I will tell you, one of the things that helped me get hired on then was the fact that I was a female, because everybody and their brother was lined up for military or law enforcement jobs during that time. It was one of the most patriotic times in our country, and just a very different time, and people were lined up for law enforcement jobs. So I got hired on then, and worked there for about 5 years. Decided to make the move to Jacksonville, about an hour north, Florida, where I am now, and I've been since 2005, and I was hired on by Jacksonville Beach Police Department. My goal was to always go into detective work. I'm a problem solver. I love to figure things out. I'm a very left brain, logical, analytical type thinker, and that job was something I loved, and I did that for probably the last 7 or 8 years of the 15 years total that I worked. And right before I turned 36, I became a mom, and my world literally just changed overnight. I should say I'm married to a law enforcement officer. He's about 2 years out of retirement. But, it just became very hard for both of us to work in that career together. And I found myself just, pushing 40, really truly making peanuts at the time. And I felt this was around 2014. And I just started to explore new things. I was also simultaneously at the same time really struggling with stress, massive stress and gut issues. And a friend of mine introduced me to a company called Plexus Worldwide out of Phoenix, Arizona. So I became a brand ambassador for this gut health company. And it was this very organic, very natural feeling process that I went into, because I was just at this certain point in my life where I knew I needed this. And I was very much had a very strong why I wanted to, transition careers, because that was extremely difficult, emotionally, all the things. I felt all the emotions coming out of that career being a mom, but I've been with my company almost 10 years now, and that is what's brought me to the Enneagram. So I have a very large team, and I have a very big team in Detroit. I have a very big team in Atlanta, and people across the country in between, many different personality types, people who are, motivated and just see the world through very different lenses. And everyone around me throughout this process was talking about how important personal and professional growth is through this, right? So I'm one of those people. I'm like, well, tell me what books to read, who do I listen to, what videos do I watch? Like I want to check every box, and I want to do this the right way. And I was doing that, but I just kind of felt like the dots weren't really connecting with leadership and how I train people. And somebody mentioned the Enneagram. And I'll admit, when I picked it up, this was about 7-8 years ago, on just like the glancing at it, it seemed very complicated to me and very complex. And I thought, I don't know, it just didn't land. And I went back about a year later and started looking at it, and I thought, this makes so much sense. And so I'm a 5, and 5s are investigators. They're also called observers. So just looking at the name of that caught my attention right away, because I'm like, well, that's my personality. And then when I started digging into it, I thought, wow, there are things about me that I've wore as a badge of honor my whole life that have truly probably been holding me back a bit. And so that was me stepping foot into it. It's been a great tool, and that's what it is. It's a tool, but it's been tremendous with me, not just with my team and in my business, but in my marriage, in parenthood, and personal relationships. So that's me in a nutshell. Yes.
Okay, well, I have a question to start based on what you just told us. And I read in your bio that you wished you had have known about Enneagram when you were in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So how would that have helped? Tell me about the Enneagram and how that would have helped. What is, I guess, starting off with, what is the whole Enneagram? Not everybody knows what it is. So maybe we should start there.
Sure. Yeah. It is one of the things I like to say out the gate to people. It's a personality typing system. But it's just a tool. It is not meant to be something to put you in a box. It's not meant to, label you. It's not meant to be something to use as an excuse for your behavior or weaponize, you know what I mean? It's just a tool. And I don't even think it's a standalone tool. Like, it can be used in conjunction with, other things. But it's uncanny to me how it just really maps on to understanding somebody's core motivation. So I've had every kind of personality assessment or psychology testing, right? To carry a badge and a gun, they want to make sure I'm working, up here, and I know what's, so I've done, I believe it's called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That was several hours. I've done Myers-Briggs. I've done all kinds of things over the years that have given me an overview of my personality, mainly just adjectives of describing me. But the Enneagram is not just who you are, it's why you do the things you do. So that is what really intrigued me to it. So it's about the core motivation. Every single one of us, no matter what type you are, there's 9 types, and it's the core motivation that we move through life in. And most of us, subconsciously just in this path to kind of like on the hamster wheel of what keeps us safe and what we're used to. And, but it's about why you do the things you do. And I wish I would have known it in law enforcement, because I did work with a lot of A-type personalities. I did work with, looking back, knowing what I know about the Enneagram, I'm certain I work with a lot of type 6s and type 2s. Type 2s are helpers, and type 6s are loyalists. And there are people that are like 6s, for example, are just down for the cause. They're about the mission. So they're very selfless people, and 2s are helpers, exactly what that implies. They want to help, they want to give, serve and protect. I'm sure I worked with a lot of them. And in any workspace, there's unhealthy components of people you work around. And I think the Enneagram would have given me more compassion, understanding of the supervisor I had, or the people on the squad that I worked around, because it truly, once you start to understand it and you understand the other 9 types, it really allows you to be more compassionate and understanding of, wow, we have 2 different perspectives here, and I respect that, and I get it, if that makes sense. I feel like it was a long answer.
Totally makes sense. I wonder, does knowing someone else's Enneagram, if you're not an Enneagram coach, how do you know what I'm saying? Like, how are you reaching out, or how are you connecting or communicating with somebody who's in a completely different type than you are? Maybe a class. Is there a type that clashes?
That's a great question. So I would say there's no one type better than the other. They are just truly 9 different perspectives. So I say to people, it's almost like looking through 9 different lenses, right? Maybe different hues of color, even if you want to compare it to that. We just see things differently. I think perhaps there are some types maybe in marriage. So I'll just give you an example. This is what I've come across, because I'm actually getting certified with the company that I went through to get certified as an Enneagram coach. They also, a couple years later, offered like a marriage certification, couple certification. So I've encountered this a lot with, and I work with mostly women on my team with Plexus, but often once they start to discover and unravel their own type, they'll say, I wonder what my husband is. And with every type, we have a different perspective, of course. We have a different talk style. We have a different orientation of time. There's all kinds of, so I think there are probably, it's safe to say that there are types that go together like peanut butter and jelly, and there might be some that have more friction. But, of course, I think there's no 2 types that I would say, oh, never date this person or never marry this person. But in the healthiest expression, any of the types, of course, I think would meld together perfectly. But there's big differences with how they approach things, and for sure. Yeah. And I can give you an example of that. If you like. I have a personal trainer who's become one of my good friends over the last 2 years. He is a type 1, which ones are called traditionally called perfectionists. They're also called improvers. And I'm married to a 1. My husband's a 1. So I very much understand the 1 like I do my own type. And his wife is a 3, and 3s are achievers, and they're also called performers. So 1s are very much driven. The unconscious motivation of the 1 is to do what's right, what's good. I call them like my moral compass friends, right? Like, so if I'm ever struggling with a decision in something, I will call my 1 friends or talk to my husband, because even if it's something I don't want to hear, they're going to tell me the right thing to do. And then 3s are very much, the unconscious motivation of the 3 is to be successful or appear successful and avoid failure at all costs. They want to be admired. They're very much people who feel like they are valued for what they do, not so much for who they are. So they're very performance-based and very image conscious. And I work with a lot of 3s in my business because they get stuff done and they're very driven. So when you got a 1 and a 3 combo, they're both trainers, and his wife, she sells cake pops on the side. They're like protein cake pops, and they're delicious. And they deliver them to several stores around the city where we live. And I order some from them through the month. But my trainer, who's the 1, said to me the other day, and I told him, this morning I trained with him and I mentioned I was going to be a guest on this podcast. He's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You need to send this to me, when it's out. So he's going to hear this. But I told him, I said, this is one of the things I like to talk about 1s and 3s, to give an example. 1s are idealists. So they're going to do things what they perceive to be the right way, where 3s are pragmatic thinkers, pragmatic people. So when these 2 people approach their goals, 1s, like he tells me, I pull out the freaking cake pop recipe every month, and we're going by the recipe. No matter how many batches of cake pops they've made together, he's got the recipe in hand. Where his wife, 3s think efficiency. What's the quickest way I can get across the finish line here? I might, not completely follow the recipe, but this is what I'm doing. And he said sometimes they'll, butt heads playfully over that, just as far as how this batch turns out or that batch. He's like, should follow the recipe. And so I said this to him because he's not super familiar with the Enneagram. And I said, well, you're a 1 and she's a 3. And in my brain, this makes total sense to me. So you need to loosen up and not white knuckle the recipe, which is what I tell my husband when we pull out instructions to build something from IKEA. Let's take a deep breath. Maybe we can just look at the schematic. Maybe we don't have to go, but my personality kind of lends itself to like a rule follower too. So I tend to follow instructions, but somebody who's a 3, it's like, I got to get stuff done. I'm moving. 8s are like that too. I'm moving here. I don't care what you're doing. I need to get this done. And they don't care if it's perfect. 1s are focused on perfection. So to give you an example of that. So there are types that can be great together and even greater together. But I feel like, I would never say there's 2 types that are bad together. I guess if they're unhealthy, probably. So no matter what type you are.
Okay, Kate, I want to know what you are.
I struggle with the Enneagram because I don't know. And maybe I need somebody else to look at me and say, oh yeah, that's totally you. And also I just love what Steph was sharing there about the different insights that she has into it, and it in its healthiest form, or this number in so I don't know how many times I've done Steph's quiz, and I did it again today, and I got, my top is 5, and then I got a tie between 4 and 8 for the second place. So I don't know. I'm so curious to dig more and to read more about the Enneagram. So
Yeah.
So knowing Kate, Stephanie, does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I know Kate's done it before, and we've chatted a little bit about this in the past, and she said she was a 5, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense to me. I mean, one of the things she said, I don't know if we had hit record already, but she's reading several books right now, and that's the life of the 5. There's not enough knowledge that you can consume as a 5. I read multiple books. My husband reads one book at a time, and he reads a lot, but he reads one book at a time. And I'll order 3, 4 books. He's like, did you finish a lot? I'm like, no, I read, don't mind me and how I read. You read your books, I'll read mine. But that is very 5 to me. 5s are the most non-emotional of the Enneagram. Not that they don't have access to emotions, but they typically just have it shut off. And 5s get out of consuming knowledge and learning new things. That's equal to what 7s and other types get out of relationships and things with people, contact, interactions with people, where 5s are very intellectually based. And not to say they're the smartest type by any means, but that is what makes them feel safe, is knowledge. So the growth path of the 5 is to the 8. So it doesn't surprise me that you had 8 in there as well. And a couple of my best friends are 8s, and I think that's why I gravitate towards 8s, because that's my growth path. So and that's another thing that I love about the Enneagram. On a side note, if anybody listening to this who isn't super familiar, it very much gives you a path of growth. So it will tell you, we go towards another type in growth, we go towards, or security, they call it. We go toward another type when we're under stress. There's good thing, even though the other number that you go to under stress, you can still pull good things from that type. But ultimately, it lays out a growth path for you. And I know it's a very good thing for me to be operating as an 8, because that's when I stop absorbing all the info, and I get into action with producing and doing and executing. So I think it doesn't surprise me that 5s go to 8 in strength, because that's what you want. 5s are, typically have a lot of knowledge about things. This is like me with the Enneagram. I'm like, plugging in and reading and studying and all this stuff. And the goal is to share it with the world and not keep it to yourself. So, yeah, Kate, we'll have to do a call sometime and talk about it. I mean,
Yeah, I would love that, because my whole world is emotion and self-awareness, and talking of emotion, and being like moved by the beauty of a sunset with tears pouring. Like I'm very much connected to the emotion. So maybe that's what stumbles me up about the 5. But oh my God, yes. I mean, I've been traveling lots for work, and I take 5 books in my suitcase, and I stop in the bookstore, and I'm buying 5 books for what? I don't know, but for a heavier suitcase. But I'm so excited that I have the books, and I can't wait to read them. And I love to learn. Like when I read that about, like, every day, I love to learn, whatever that looks like, however that looks like. Yeah,
Same.
so that resonates.
Same. So I will offer this, like, there are, whatever type you are, and there's 9 types, 1 through 9, you have 2 wings. So whatever number you are, Cheryl, you're a 7. So you are either a wing 6 or a wing 8. It's whatever, think of like wings of a bird, Yep. It's whatever wings you're in between. I'm a 5, so I either wing 4 or I wing 6. And because sometimes I'll have people say to me, well, I'm a 5 wing 9. And it's like, no, it's your wings are the types right next to you. And I'll offer this to you, Kate. I would bet, just off the cuff, because of everything you just shared, and I know you're probably a 5 wing 4. And I think this is one of the coolest and most interesting things about the Enneagram. When you look at the diagram, the 5 and the 4 are on the bottom. And there is I almost want to say, just such a deep abyss between these 2 numbers, because you have the most non-emotional number, which is the 5, and the most emotional number, which is the 4, which is probably why 5 doesn't resonate so much with you, because you're way in that 4 wing, which makes you a freaking unicorn. So that maybe that's why you're like 5. I don't know. There's a lot about the 5, but I'm very much in my emotions, and you are, and you're probably just deeply in that 4 wing. And that's why you feel that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Sharmin. I know you did it.
How does the Enneagram help a person professionally?
This is a great question. So the Enneagram, how I like to describe it to people is it's almost like a GPS of sorts. So it does tell you on, this motivation, what you're motivated by. But it also very much lays out what you look like when you are healthy, average, or unhealthy in that expression of yourself. I don't mean, health wise. I'm just saying when you're in the healthiest expression of yourself, it lays out for you according to your type. If you're an 8, you look like this. An average 8, you're in this pathway. Unhealthy as an 8, you're in this pathway. And what's helpful about that is, I've kind of used this example, like when you're driving down the highway and you veer off path and you hit those rumble strips, like on the side of the highway, and to get back on because you kind of went across the line there. That's what the Enneagram does. It's like a course correct, and it gets you back on track. And I will say, along with your overall type and whatever, if you're in a average or healthy or unhealthy place, there are definitely aspects about your type that apply to leadership, how you lead people, how you grow, your interactions with others, your interpersonal relationships and things like that. So I think and you being on the growth path, it applies to everything in life, but that's a great question. Understanding your type and the healthiest expression of your type, the blind spots of your type, we all have a vice. Every type has a particular vice that particularly holds us back. We all have a specific defense mechanism that holds us back. So this is the work of the Enneagram. So as you start to understand your type entirely, it absolutely translates over into your business and leadership and things like that too.
Is there a cheat sheet to help me understand my type 8?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I created a PDF myself, and my partner Heather Alashea, which Kate, we haven't made it official or launched it yet, but we're dipping our toes into the Enneagram world together. And we've been doing local workshops here we just did one for a marketing company here in Jacksonville, Florida. And we have a PDF that gives every type from 1 through 9. It covers an overview of their type, their core motivation, their passion, their core fear, core desire. And it also touches on leadership, their strengths, team building strengths, talk style, and things like that. So I would love to send that to you guys if you're interested. I could email it to you. And I mean, as far as cheat sheet, there's, this is very, just beginner level and just an overview. And I think it would be super helpful. Something I wish I would have had when I started, because, you start to get to Google with the Enneagram and you get everything from A to Z. You get everything from, people at home writing blogs about it to PhDs talking about it. And we just decided to make something very simple that we could, use as a tool in workshops and things like that. So I'd be happy to share that with you all. Yeah.
I would love to ask about parenting and Enneagram.
Yes. We just did a workshop last week, and this was brought up because one of the women in the workshop has a couple of teenagers. And so children, of course, came up in this. My son's 11, and he's taken a couple assessments, and he's listened to me talk about it. And we talk about it openly as a family, and he knows it's a tool. And I had him take outside assessments, not just mine. But I think where children are concerned, as soon as they're able to understand and interpret, mature enough to answer the questions for themselves, I think you should, you could have them take an assessment, or you can just give them a book and sit down with a book and talk to them about each type as well. I don't necessarily want everybody to believe like you got to put everything, all of your money on an assessment online, right?
Mhm.
Because I think it's important to note that this is your own personal journey, and no particular assessment should deem your type for you. Some of us find it very quickly, like I did when I just looked at the name of the 5. I'm like, oh, that must be me. And once I started diving into it, I said, oh, yes, this is me. But for others, it could take weeks, months, or even years to land on their type. And that's okay. So I want to throw that out there. And I think it's important to I want to say this as a parent, not to put your child in a box and not to deem them, what you think they are, just let this be a very organic process that they want to be a part of. But my son's an 8. And I thought, wow, if that's not God sending me somebody who's on my growth path who absolutely triggers me every day. And you know what I mean? So like, wow, got it. Lord, I hear you. I got it. Crystal clear, message delivered. But yeah, so he's an 8, and I'm learning a lot from him. And 8s are they champion for the underdogs in society, and they want to challenge rules. That's why they're called the challengers. And not necessarily in a bad way, but they are very much honed in on protecting the weak and vulnerable. And that's why they come off very strong, and they're just very direct people and straight shooters. And so I love and admire 8s very much. And so I think it's a great tool as long as you're using it as a tool. And I'm not an expert in personality, but when I started diving into this, I looked at quite a bit around the whole notion of personality, right? When is personality developed? And the majority of research out there will tell you it's between ages 4 and 7. That's certainly impacted by trauma and, different things that occur. I feel like my story was impacted by that. The trauma I experienced as a little person. And that's really what the Enneagram is. As little people, we developed this story for ourselves, that kept us safe, that provided us a way to show up and appease, or just act, think, and feel around the big people in our lives, right? And it worked for us. And what can be problematic is as you get older, that story clinging so hard to it, because we're truly not our personality. It's something we've adopted for ourselves, and just we're real comfortable in it. But that's kind of how the Enneagram starts with us. So I often get asked, like, do you ever change types? Because I've had people say, well, I think it was a 2 in my 20s and now I'm a 7. And you don't. Your type is your type. Your core motivation is your core motivation. Not that you can't relate to other types, but you specifically are one type. But there's so many different expressions of that type, right? There's literally not just 9 different types of people walking around on the planet. So there's so many different, it's very nuanced, and there's a lot of things that influence that. But I will say that your type is your type. That main type is your type forever.
So you establish your Enneagram based on your date of birth and time of birth, correct?
No,
or is it just the questions?
I would say as your personality forms, your type is formed.
Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say probably between the ages of 4 and 7, when they say most personalities are formed around this age, I would say your type is generated then. Definitely not a birth thing, but for sure a product of, environment and, I'm sure there's a genetic component to that too. But I would definitely say between ages 4 and 7 is likely when your type was formed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Can understanding the Enneagram be helpful to me in understanding those around me, or in understanding and improving my relationship?
Mm-hmm. Very much, very much. I'll give you an example. You know, like I said, my husband's a 1, I'm a 5. And ones have this, they can be very black or white thinkers and very just have this understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And many years, we just had our 13th wedding anniversary, but we've been together 17 years. And I met him when I was in my late 20s. And there were times when he would say things to me over the course of the years, and I would say, well, that sounded condescending. Or, you know, I'd say something like, well, pump the brakes, Judge Judy. That sounds very judgmental. And he would say, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to be condescending. That wasn't condescending. And I'm like, yeah, it was. And he was cutting me to the core, because the core fear of the 5 is to be viewed as somebody who's incompetent or incapable. So he would say things sometimes, and I'm like, whoa, get off your high horse, mister. And he's like, Steph, I just answered your question. So I think that now that I know when he says things, I just understand that that's his, this is who he is, and this is his talking style. This is the perspective he's coming from. And it's given me so much grace and so much compassion around how he responds and how he looks at things. And it's helped me in parenting too, because, I naturally know how he's going to respond to my son in a certain situation. And I can, I don't know, like kind of buffer that or give a new perspective around it, and so yeah, it's really helped me in that sense. And I feel like it helps most people in that sense, because you're just looking through a different lens. And even our orientation of time is very different. For example, 5s, 4s, and 9s are acclimated to the past. So they're always thinking about the past. 1s, 2s, and 6s are in the present. And 3s, 7s, and 8s are future oriented thinking. So I feel like my husband grounds me a lot, because I'm always on last week or last year or 10 years ago. And he's like, I don't care about that. I'm worried about today. Like today is, and he's a very, he makes checklists. Like every day he's got a list going of what he needs to accomplish today. And he doesn't go to bed happy unless he checks that list off. And I could give a shit less about a list every day. So it's just things like that help me, like, this is what makes him tick. This is what makes him happy, and what makes me happy, So if that answers your question, it provides a lot. And you don't have to understand each type even on a really deep, like PhD level. It's just an overview of each type can help you understand, oh, this is the perspective they're coming from. Like 9s are peacemakers. They're conflict avoidant. And I've had friends who are 9s, still have friends that are 9s, I mean. And I will just say, well, why don't you just say this to the person? Or why don't you just, oh my gosh, that's worst case scenario for them. So sometimes they can have a lot of conflict and drama because they don't want to, confront the issue, or just say the thing out loud, because they're afraid to, to create conflict. So understanding that about each type is really, really helpful. Very helpful. And just, comes back to that. It allows you to give more compassion and grace to them without wanting to, choke them out or,
Thank you, Stephanie. That makes a lot of sense, because, I'm thinking about personality assessments that you've taken, and it teaches you about you and it focuses on you. But I like how you are explaining that despite you have your type. When you explain about the wings, I became visual and I like, okay, the 8 and my wings are 7. So I need to understand 7 and 9 so that I can function well, because I just love it. So thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, Stephanie, so many things. So just so cool. So I had to go back and look at my results, and my top 2 were 5 and 4. So you hit that. Like, so cool things I'm gonna explore. You talking about your husband, I'm wondering, like, is like, that's just so Ken. He's so like, well, that's a bad person. And I'm like, there are no bad people. Like, that's really the conversations. We really have those conversations, right? I'm like, no, it's trauma. It's this. Let's get curious about, right? No, it's black or white. And then my son also, constantly talks to me about, why isn't everybody secured a house? Why do people not just have houses to live in? Why can people own more houses than they need? What is this capitalistic market that's built? Like, that's really his whole go-to. So I'm curious if he's an 8 and really young, like 10, he would ask me questions like, do you really believe in white privilege? Because I sat with that in a weird way. And he'd also ask me, do you really believe in pay inequity for women? And it would get my insides bubbling, like, and I'm sure I've shared this with Cheryl and Sharmin before. I thought, I was like, oh my God, am I raising like Alex Keaton? Like, it terrified me. And then when I would overhear him, he would actually be debating somebody else, but he was using what I said. I was helping build his case, right? He was playing devil's advocate with me so that he was getting more information, and that was building his case. And my girl, I'm thinking of her when you talk about a 9. And then I'm thinking about when you talk about, this is based on personality. And then I'm thinking about what unhealed childhood trauma looks like and manifests in adulthood.
Mhm.
And what I know of what unhealed childhood trauma looks like is people pleasing and having no boundaries and not being able to say no and narcissistic behavior. And I also am so aware of my girl and how, and it just, what makes me so curious is what came first, like the chicken or the egg, because she just was one who would do, right? If there was something to be done, she'd do it from such a young age. And with a lens of compassion as a mom, and looking back on it, I would have totally changed what I did. However, I'm aware of times I leaned into that, right? I'm aware of times that she was doing it, so it's getting done.
Mhm.
And so when I think about, and then also knowing if a child has to choose between authenticity or attachment wins every single time. And I think of how she can't say no, or how she has trouble with boundaries, or she really wants to people please, right? I could never say that. Like, she's going through something right now and I'm like, just tell them, blame it on me, say it's me. She's like, I can't do that. And I'm like, you can, use me. And so it really gets me curious as to what is first, the chicken or, quote, the egg, right? Like, this is how she was born, and these were some of her things, and the environment that she was raised in really allowed those to grow into her thinking those are her actual, how she stays worthy. Or was she born with that and the environment just blew blew oxygen on those embers? So it makes me even more curious about who we are.
Right. Would it be helpful if I just did like a brief overview real quick of each type?
I think that'd be great. What do you guys think?
Do that?
And I really want to thank you, Steph. Like, this is so fun and so interesting. And I think self-awareness is one of the keys to a planet full of love. So I love that this is what you do.
And I'm gonna take notes so I can call in the diagnosis of everyone I know.
Well, I love this, you guys. I mean, it's really become something I'm very passionate about because it's been such a helpful tool and a big part of my growth. I don't know who said it, but I read somewhere that if we're not self-aware, we can't self-correct. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I know there's been a lot of studies. Cornell University did one, I don't know how many years ago this was, where they took, I think it was 72 top executives, between the 50 million and 5 billion mark, companies, corporations. So 72 of these people that they studied intensely and asked them specifically, what's the needle mover for you as a leader? Like, what has been the golden ticket for you that's really got you to this, level of leadership and success? And unequivocally, the answer across the board was self-awareness. So I think typically, and this is a whole other conversation, but I think typically, like when we think of like leadership, we think of, creating a vision and people skills and all those things. But ultimately, the drawing board, the starting line is self-awareness. So I wanted to throw that out there. And Ian Cron is somebody that I followed in the Enneagram world. He's mentioned that study. He's mentioned other things that I've dug deeper in and learned more on. He's got an amazing podcast. He's got a great Enneagram starter book. I would say a very good primer if you're just dipping your toe in the Enneagram. It's called The Road Back to You by Ian Cron, C-R-O-N. So I just want to throw that out there. I've learned so many things from this man. I hope one day to meet him. But just the 50,000 foot view of the Enneagram and the 9 types. Ones are called perfectionists, reformers. Ian Cron has kind of appropriated the name of improvers. And I love that name because ones are people who can walk into a room and automatically see everything in it that needs to be corrected or fixed or something that can be improved upon. They're very great at parsing out like processes and great like project managers, but they also are, judges and law enforcement and, attorneys and people that go that realm too, because the moral compass is so big with ones. Like that's, that just is how they're wired. 2s are called helpers. They're also called givers. I often say these are like your BFFs. These are the friends that are going to not only help you plan the party, they're going to come beforehand, help you decorate and clean up afterwards. They're very selfless people. They're the most relational people. They wake up every day thinking about relationships and other people. Those are 2s. I work with a lot of 2s in my business as well. And these are often women that I will hear say things like, well, I don't really care about making money. I just want to help my friends. And it's like, well, that's admirable and you're going to do that, but we're going to make money too. So let's not apologize for that. But that's like kind of the spirit of the 2 is I want to help. 3s are achievers. They're also called performers. And these are people, like I said, very driven, very goal oriented, very image conscious. This is something Ian Cron also references in his book, The Road Back to You. I know you guys are probably obviously old enough to remember Andre Agassi, tennis champion. I did a workshop with some younger people and they had no idea who I was talking about. So I know you guys know what I'm talking about. But he did a commercial like back in the, 80s or 90s where I think it was a Ferrari. He rolls up in a Ferrari and it was a Ray-Ban sunglass commercial. And he like lowers his sunglasses. He gets out of the car and he's like, image is everything. That's like the classic commercial I would peg for a 3. And he wrote a memoir years later after tennis, and he had referenced in there the relationship with his father. And I think his father, and I don't mean to misspeak if this is not a fact, but I believe his father was very much either a tennis pro or into tennis, played tennis his whole life. And Andre said in his memoir that I don't know that my father ever distinguished, or I could never distinguish between my father's love for me and his love for the game. So threes very much grow up hearing this message, very either directly or indirectly. You are loved for what you do, not who you are. That's why they're so image conscious and driven, and things like that. Fours are what I call the unicorns of the Enneagram. They are individualists. They're also called romantics. I like to refer to them as, and this is just like a stereotype umbrella of each archetype, right? Think of like poets, musicians, people very in tune with their emotions, even actors, just very much motivated by a need to be authentic, unique, and seen as special. That's the four. And they're the most in touch with their emotions out of every type. Fives are investigators, observers. I've also heard them called as thinkers, the most cerebral, the most non-attached emotionally, very much motivated by a need to be viewed as somebody competent, capable, knowledgeable, the least relational, the least emotional, and they're kind of very much they very much operate on an emotional battery. Every day when they wake up, it's like, how much energy is this going to take me? They parse out their energy with things like that. Sixes are called loyalists. I believe I worked with a lot of sixes in law enforcement. Sixes are down for the cause. And kind of, Kate, when you were talking about your son a little bit, I'm like, I wonder if he was a six, or maybe he could possibly be a six. Sixes are also called devil's advocates or skeptics. They want to question everything, and in a good way, like they're not going to take, verbatim, like sometimes the answer that they're given. They're on a mission to really seek certainty, and there's nothing in this life that's certain. So when I train sixes or coach sixes on my team, we kind of do this what if dance. Well, what if nobody wants to order my product, or what if nobody wants to do this, or I don't know, what if the world ends tomorrow? What if we could go on and on and on? What if that didn't happen? So I feel like sixes are always the people in the room that are like, what if? But in saying that, they are very amazing problem solvers, and they're very gifted at seeing problems way before they even happen. So they're great if you got a six on your team who can head things off and kind of almost be the voice of reason in the room with, all right, everybody, let's slow your roll. Let's talk about what could happen. Sevens are enthusiasts. I call them social butterflies. They are very much driven by a need to be satisfied, content, supported. They are great visionaries. They are great at casting vision. They're just wired like that. Let's talk about the amazing stuff that could happen, that we could create, that we could do. Sevens don't, in saying all that, they very much want to avoid any kind of pain or uncomfortable feelings, or so they tend to focus on the silver lining in things. They're master reframers, and what that means is I call them like script flippers. So I have a couple of sevens that are leaders on my team. One in particular will call me, and she's got a right to be upset about this issue that she starts to tell me, and listening to her, I'm upset for her, like I'm fired up for her. And in the minute of her talking about it, she will flip the script and reframe it and make it sound, by the end of it, she's like, you know what, Steph, I'm not even upset that this happened, because this person must have just had a bad day. And, I'm just going to pray for them. And I've learned a lesson out of this, and I'm still pissed. I'm on the other line, and I'm still pissed for her. And I'm like, no, you're going to sit in those feelings, and you're going to be upset because you have a right to be. But that's the mind of the seven, right? They're like, no, I don't want to talk about unpleasant stuff. So I joke with her a lot and I say, I know it's all rainbows and unicorns in your universe, Noelle, but we're going to say, let's be pissed off for a minute, rightfully so. So that's the 7. 8s are challengers. And like I said, I've also referred to them or heard them referred to as like the boss. CEO energy, not afraid to make a decision. They are very direct talkers. And I love that about people. It's like, don't sugarcoat it, like shoot it to me straight. That's what 8s are gifted as, or gifted. One of the things they're gifted with. Sometimes I could shoot them in the foot, or whatever. It could backfire on them because my best friend's an 8. And sometimes she says something. And I'm like, wow, she just said that out loud in a room full of people. So, just kind of being aware, but they are just straight shooters. And I absolutely love that about 8s. They're very motivated to be independent and to protect the weak and to not be vulnerable at all costs. They do not want to be vulnerable or show any kind of vulnerability at all. And 9s are peacemakers, very much driven, motivated to keep peace, harmony. They're your go along to get along friend. The things that 9s have to watch out for is not riding out on the agenda of someone else's life, right? What I say to the 9s I work with, it's like, what do you want? What do you want? Not your husband, not the people you work with, not your kids. What do you want? Because 9s are very selfless in that way. They're sweethearts and they're very accommodating. So it's like, where do you want to go eat? I don't care, Steph. You pick. Where do you want to go? They're that personality type. So that is like a very quick, really broad overview of each one. There's lots of nuances to each type, but that's just the 50,000 foot view of 1 through 9.
I'm so glad you did this. I'm so glad you did this because number 1, when I did the Enneagram test or quiz, I came up with as a 7. And as I'm reading on what prints out, I'm like, no, 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 and no. And then when you started describing it the way you did, I'm actually totally a 7 with a sprinkle of 9. And I'm looking at this going, what comes across to me right now is, now I know why there are Enneagram coaches, not just the test to take.
Yeah.
Because just now you totally validated everything about needing a coach for something like this. I think that's really cool, especially when you look at, you were talking about the wings, and then I had these percentages somewhere, and this 83% 9 and 89% 7, but then there's my wings. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, the unconscious motivation that each type has is very much connected to a vice of ours that we cling to, that keeps us safe, that we feel good about. In the Enneagram world, it's called the deadly sin of each type. It's also referred to as the passion. And when I say passion, I don't mean something you're passionate about, like think like crime of passion or something. It's truly the source of our suffering in each type. And each of us have one. And understanding each one for the type, like you'd probably, we're all humans here. We resonate with all of them, but there's one in particular, what our type is, that we resonate with, that we cling to that. So for a lot of people, when you start to dig into the Enneagram and you're trying to uncover your type, it can feel kind of triggering, and I always say to people, I'm like, don't be afraid to lean into that, because a lot of this essentially is shadow work. It's like things about ourselves that we either have suppressed, don't want to look at, or ignored, or maybe just weren't aware of. And then you start hearing it and you're like, oh my gosh, that is me. Holy, yeah. So I appreciate you saying that, Cheryl. I mean, it's a process, and only you can discover your type, land on that. But I do appreciate you saying, I always encourage people, I love doing typing interviews with people where I can ask you a series of questions, because there are types that will type that mistype a lot, like 3s and 7s or 3s and 8s. And they're all very optimistic type, and they're all in that, with their orientation of time where they're future oriented thinkers. So sometimes they'll answer questions similarly, and they'll go back and forth between, well, I don't know, am I a 3 or an 8? And it comes down to that motivation, that unconscious motivation, that's the driver. And there are questions around that I can ask somebody to help them land, on that type. So it is helpful to talk to somebody about it if you're really interested in digging deeper. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you, Cheryl, for asking that question, because that was my question. Because my 8 is 80%, my 7 is actually 71%. And then it went into my 1 is 69%, my 4 and 5, 66%, my type 6 is 63%, type 2, 54%, and then type 3 and 9, 46%.
Yeah.
And when I looked at that in the beginning, I'm like, oh, these are all my parts showed all of my parts showed up in the assessments, because there's
well, something I didn't mention is something called triads of the Enneagram. So you have 8s, 9s, and 1s are in the gut triad. 5s, 6s, and 7s are in the head triad, and 2s, 3s, and 4s are in the heart triad. So, like I said, we're all human beings. We have access to all 3 of those: head, heart, and gut. It's our body's 3 centers of intelligence. But we tend to, just like our type, we tend to be very comfortable operating out of one of those. So 8s, 9s, and 1s tend to be very gut instinct, direct, what you see is what you get type people. 2s, 3s, and 4s come from an emotional perspective through the heart. 5s, 6s, and 7s are more from the head. People over the years will ask me, Steph, how do you feel about this? And I'll tell you naturally just what I think, because I go there first. So part of my work in this is to go to my heart, right? And my gut. But I've really been trying to lean into that wing 4, that emotional access that I have, and like go more into my heart and my emotions and understanding emotions. And that's kind of part of the work with this. So yeah, you can, I think you're probably the way you scored and like things, if what I've said to you about an 8, just as an overview, if that really resonates with you, you're most likely an 8. And just looking at that, you probably scored really high in the 7, because you're probably way more comfortable in that 7 wing, being more of the social butterfly and the enthusiast and, spontaneous and excited, maybe more so than the peacemaker wing. We have access to both, but we tend to stay in one of those wings very, very much, much more.
That is so interesting. I'm just blown away by this. Anybody have any more questions for Stephanie at this time?
So cool, Steph. So
Yes.
great.
But what's sticking in my head is, if you're not self-aware, you can't self-correct. That's sticking in my head. So thank you for that. What were you saying, Kate? Sorry.
I was just going to share for people who are past orientated, just to give yourself the gift of, you have the eyes that you have now aren't the eyes that you had then.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And just understanding at the end of the day that this is just a tool that just gives you so much more compassion for yourself and for everyone else around you. It's like, if you were to think about going to like your ideal dinner party, right? All of us, who's, like there's one person that's going to be cooking, one person going to be decorating, one person maybe that, is like the focus of everything going on with all of us showing up at this party could be very different. And as elementary as that sounds, it's just understanding that we all approach things differently. We all look at things differently. We have different needs and wants, and it just really gives you this perspective, outside perspective of people think differently than you. And I happen to, especially in the day and time that we're in today, we've never been so polarized and so just, across the board. And what would happen if this world just extended some grace to the person next to us who may think, look, and feel completely different than we do, but we understand their point of view and we appreciate their perspective. I think there's so much power in that. And I hope one day we'll get there.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So just tell us where we can find you, Stephanie. We're gonna put it on the show notes, but tell us where we can find you.
Well, first of all, I hope this isn't the only time the four of us get together. I would love to continue conversations because there's a lot we could unpack about this, but I very much appreciate you all being having me on here and doing the work that you're doing. Stephanie Shaughnessy, it's Steph with an F is what I tell everybody because people automatically go to the PH, but Stephanie Shaughnessy on Facebook. I'm Stephanie Shaughnessy on Instagram. StephanieShaughnessy.com is my website, and please reach out. This is something I love to talk about, and if you're interested in learning more, or maybe you've been conflicted about this type or that type, I just love to tell people, I'm like, this is my jam. I love to talk about it. It's truly passionate one. So, and I think the more that we can spread the word of an amazing tool like this to people and just, help cultivate self-awareness, we just collectively, all of us, make the world a better place. So I'm all about it.
I love that. We're so grateful for you, Stephanie. You definitely is not going to be the last time you're here. This was excellent. We just really enjoyed this, and it blew my mind, literally blew my mind. So thank you. And we will be talking to you again soon. Thank you for listening to the Transforming Lives podcast panel. What a gift of a show today. Grateful for your listening, and we'll see you next time. Don't go.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Transforming Lives panel podcast. We hope that you received some nuggets of wisdom and seeds to plant along your journey of transformation. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we encourage you to let us know and to share us with those that matter in your life. If you would like to connect with anyone from the panel or our guest speaker, you can find all of the ways to connect in our show notes. We have so much gratitude for you, and we are so thankful to be a part of your day. Until next time, take great care.